We'll begin. Hello everybody, good evening. I'm Ruchi Rana. I'm the founder of Team Namaste Psychology. Quickly to just go over what do we do. We are all mental health professionals who started this page, and we've been doing a lot of work for community-based work to spread awareness. So some of the goals that a lot of mental professionals have is to reach out to people and talk about things that are not spoken about, and especially everything related to mental health which is not spoken about. Let me quickly get on to telling you a few things that we've done in past 3-4 months. We've taken up a lot of workshops for community, for people, workshops like emotional first aid, workshop like conflict management, workshops on mindfulness based training, all of them for open public, and some workshops are professionals. We've done so many live sessions with different professionals working as mental health professionals or educators, and today again we've come up with a live talking about sensitive issue, talking about child sexual abuse. So this is a small trigger warning for everybody that we will be talking about something that is not spoken a lot, child sexual abuse, but then I think it will be quite an awareness for everybody, and these are few things to be known because the statistics about it show a high number of child sexual abuse, which our guest Anuja will be talking a lot on. Telling you all about a small quote which Anuja has said in one of her videos, which I really like, is basically to bring about real change in a person, an organization, or culture. We need to be starting to talk about uncomfortable conversations, and I think to begin to talk about that is difficult for a lot of people. One, because of denial, because of a lot of shame attached to it, and a lot of guilt to even tell somebody what they are going through. And this per se belongs to all mental health issue, but a lot with child sexual abuse too. One, because people are not educated, and second, because even if children go through this, it's difficult for them to identify and understand what's happening with them. So I think Anuja, I'll just invite her to start talking on it. And to introduce Anuja, Anuja is from Ahmedabad. Anuja Amin, her full name is. She's the founder of Circles of Safety, another page which you all must visit to, because she does a lot of amazing work for awareness and educating people about child sexual abuse. She's a postgraduate on done her postgraduate in human resource management from LSE. She's also done her bachelor's of science in psychology, and the major reason for her to do that was her interest or her mission to reach out to people, especially with trauma experiences or traumatic childhood. Something very important is, she started to do a lot of age appropriate sexuality education. She calls it as rights based curriculum, if I'm not wrong. And she started this program to sort of, get children, parents, community, culture, people, everybody who's associated with children to know more about child sexual abuse, and even for children themselves to know about simple topics like puberty, gender stereotypes, bullying, consent, and talking about these issues where maybe a lot of people don't talk about. So I'll invite her and we will begin talking about child sexual abuse, and I hope I've done justice to her. But hi, Anuja.
Hi, lovely to be here, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, a lengthy one.
I know, no, but it's something that I wanted to not miss on. So if I have missed on something, please just introduce something that I've missed on.
Oh no, I think you've covered it all. And thank you for mentioning Circles of Safety and the work that we've been doing. I think it's very important for us to get the message out there. So thank you.
Absolutely. I think you're doing wonderful, and that's why I was intrigued to really call you on here to talk on something that I've been wanting to talk on for a long time. So I think we'll just begin because Instagram gives us very less time, and I don't want to do that, to waste time. Right? So I'll just begin with the first question.
Sure.
All right.
Go ahead.
Just reminding followers, in case you have questions, we will take them up. But just if there is a time crunch, then let's see how it goes. But we'll try and take as many as we can. In case we can't, then please DM us. One of us will definitely answer if anything is, you cannot ask over here. Okay, so like you've mentioned in a lot of your videos, and I would want to, again say that you mentioned that children below 18 years, 1 in 2 children go through this experience, and that's quite a high number, right? So then, can you explain us or everybody what is child sexual abuse?
Okay, so in general, to put it very fundamentally, it is when a person, it can be an adult, it can be an older child, it can be a peer, coerces or manipulates another child into sexual activity. Very simply, that is what it's about. It's often misunderstood that it's about just about rape and molestation like that. I think it goes beyond it. So yes, these are the most obvious contact offenses, fondling a child's genitalia, or making them masturbate on the adult, etc. Apart from that, there are the non-obvious, contact offenses also. So that can be like photographing a child in the nude, or showing them sexually explicit images, or child pornography. All these are not often recognized. So many women have grown up with and they are abused. So both can cause severe trauma for a child.
Absolutely. And these are some things that you just said. Like, I think it's quite well known for people that touch, or touch without consent, or touch without could be a form of abuse. But then a lot of other things like photographing or trying to force to masturbate, these are some things which are not known to a lot of people. So thank you for telling that. Can you put some light on statistics a little more, if you can, of how frequent this happens? Yeah.
Sure. So like you said, I've already mentioned many of my talks about a national study that was done in India, and I still feel like it's so relevant, and it shocks me every time I talk about it. A study that was done in 2007, where about 12,500 children were interviewed, and they found that 53% of those children, and boys and girls being equally vulnerable, had experienced one or more forms of sexual abuse, out of which 20% had experienced severe forms. Okay, so when we're talking about molesting, we're talking about masturbation, oral sex, all of that included are the severe forms for these children. And one other study that I recently found out about during the lockdown is something that people don't really talk about, is child pornography. And when you think about that, there is a compilation of reports that is done on an annual basis worldwide, where India has recently topped the list of the amount of child sexual abuse material. So basically child pornography that is found. They found 20 lakh reports originating from India. So we have topped the list, which makes up for 11% of the total. Imagine the total material of child pornography found in the world, 11% is found in India. So when our kids in the COVID times are having access to, phones and internet and Zoom classes online and other things and all this exposure, we need to be mindful about how they are using this time.
Yeah. And that's quite a high number. I was aware of some, but I think these are very recent statistics that, they're quite shocking. I mean, it definitely get me goosebumps. Okay, so like you just mentioned, boys or girls, there's quite similar reports of them going through this kind of an experience. But this is another thing. A lot of people feel that he's just a child and he's just a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old. What can happen? So I really want you to cover or tell more about, does it happen across all the ages, and where does it how common is it? Which age parents should start somewhere start being aware about it?
Sure. So, even when you open the newspaper, you've probably come across cases where it's newborn babies who've been victims to, teenagers, to prepubescent kids. It goes all the way through, but there is it peaks, it seems to peak between 7 to 12 years. And so when people ask me, when should I start talking about it, or when do I need to be aware, I say, be aware right from the beginning. Why do you want to do any sort of firefighting? You just want to be prepared, have the knowledge about basic safety, about consent, about, you're not scaring them. You're not telling them that there are these bad people in the world who are going to hurt you. No, we don't want to come from a place of anxiety. We want to help children to build assertiveness. We want children to, just be more aware overall. So age-wise, like I said, 7 to 12 seems to be the key age, and that's why I say start early, start talking to kids, start using correct names of body parts. That's the most basic things you can start with when your child is 1 or 2, and then so they know what are private parts, what is private time, etc. And this really helps to get the conversation going. You're lifting the taboo, you're lifting the stigma, and that's a great start.
Yeah, and I think I've heard from a lot of people who educate about child sexual abuse, and also about from your videos where you say that, even if the child is 1 or 2, the moment you know that he's starting to understand, use the right words, appropriate words for all the body parts, Don't sort of use different names for especially the genitals, right? So that's another thing that was quite awakening. Okay, so we have one question. I would just want to ask that person that how does one do a reality check? Could you just elaborate a little, because that question, I don't know if I understand that. When do we a reality check on? So I think we'll take that question if she elaborates a little more.
Sure.
Okay. The next question for me is, what is the impact of child sexual abuse on emotional and intellectual abilities of children? That's one part of the question. I have second part, but I think we'll first complete this part of the question.
So, you're saying emotional and
intellectual abilities.
Okay, fine. So let me tell you, the primary damage is shame. Okay, there is shame associated with being being a victim. There is shame associated with being involved in an act that is considered taboo as a stigma. There is shame associated with feeling helpless, with your body being violated in a certain way. And so all of this causes, you would know that shame can be a deep rooted cause for low body image, for feeling unlovable, for having a low self-worth, and all of that. So it becomes a deep rooted cause. So emotionally, that can be very disturbing. How you see yourself becomes very flawed, and there is a lot of blame, guilt, that is associated with this. So I think one thing that I generally do mention in my introduction is that I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse, and I have experienced this guilt and this shame, which also made it very difficult for me sometimes to, be involved in certain relationships. It on a personal front, it does really affect every aspect of your being, right? Also, if you talk about intellectually, definitely, people have known to have a drop in academic performance, etc. It's also a cause for various mental illnesses. So if you see, when you talk about adverse childhood experiences, okay, 1/3 of all the mental illnesses that are in the world seem to be caused by adverse childhood experiences. So this becomes like a fundamental way in which the child is already starting off on the wrong foot. So there can be obesity issues also, there can be eating disorders, because fundamentally they're probably trying to become less attractive so that also doesn't ever happen to them again. There's PTSD, there's anxiety, there's depression, there is high use of alcohol and substance abuse in general, drug use. All of that are also things that are cropped from being a survivor.
Yeah, and I think it all stems out from, it's just as you looked earlier, and that's why every other aspect you want to get onto is to make yourself feel better, and it doesn't. And that's why all these things that you just spoke about, these anxiety, depression, PTSD, I mean, as many as cases that I see, this has been a very common sort of trauma that they go through, like the traumatic experience giving those subtle signs very similar that I see with abuse. Maybe the presentation changes, it manipulates a little here and there, but the basic concerns are very similar.
So I remember that last week you recently had a talk on suicide prevention, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things is also that survivors are 3 times more likely to self-harm, self-destruct. And so attempt suicide is also a very real problem for survivors.
Yes. And I think the basis of suicide is feeling hopeless and feeling not at all worthy about self. So this Okay, so I think you've answered a bit about my second part of the question, where this whole evidence is suggesting this adverse childhood experiences causing a lot of damage to emotional and physical aspect of themselves, and you've mentioned that, so I wouldn't go again there. But then let's go to the next one. So, are some children more at risk? As in, this is just for a lot of viewers to know about it. Are they more at risk? And what could
it's
be
an
the
interesting
reasons?
question. So let me put it this way. In general, all children are vulnerable. Okay, so I don't want anybody to get complacent and think, that my child maybe is always monitored, or I have a great support system, and so my child is not at risk. I don't want you to get complacent, but at the same time, I don't want you to get very anxious also, because we're going to talk about things that you can do to reduce the risk. Okay, so there are some factors that make some children more vulnerable than others. So just to mention a few, abusers in their interviews have known to mention things like, especially if the abuser is a family member or an acquaintance, that they pick kids who are more lonely, feel like who are more passive, who seem to be more withdrawn. Basically they don't want to be caught, so they're trying to look for someone who's an easy target. So generally, kids of single parents in dysfunctional homes, who have been exposed to, say, domestic violence and other forms of abuse in the house, seem to be more prone to more easy targets, and are generally easily picked up by abusers. So yeah, that seems
That's
more likely, but in across socioeconomic backgrounds. So in that sense, it's pretty much everyone.
Yeah, and I think this another small you can say thing that you're doing on your page, which I really like, is you're picking up celebrities and very known people who've gone through this to normalize it. I mean, really, how much is this there?
So to just give you a statistics, you mentioned statistic around this, like which children are more prone. So it's research shows that children with special needs, or children who have, say, mental or physical, are physically handicapped, are 3 times more prone to be targets. Also, there was a study done by the Asian Center of Human Rights, and they called it India's hellholes. They studied juvenile justice homes in India. 18 has done a crime, and then they've been put in these homes to rehabilitate so that they can be given the care and attention they need to lead a better life. Now imagine, in a place where they're supposed to be rehabilitated is where they are experiencing tremendous amount of abuse. They are very vulnerable, and that's why they called it India's hell holes. And they said that this is a silent epidemic. It has reached epidemic proportions, right? So it's very, very rampant.
And talking about rampant, I think the more rampant it gets, the more we don't talk about it, and the more people don't want to talk about it, I've realized.
Yeah.
And though I think a lot of us hearing today know about it, may have experienced it, may have gone through it, or may have seen somebody going through it, or somebody reliving or telling you the experience, but yet I don't think we are really wanting to know more about it. So the reason for it is what I mentioned at the beginning of the live, is just feeling very shameful to even accept that something like this has happened. It's easy to, just push it down the rug rather than talking about it. So why do you think, just this is out of the whole talk that we had right now. One, as an educator that you look in, you want to educate more so that people get aware, and I'm pretty sure that this has to reduce, this has to come down to zero, right? If you have to do that, what do you think could be simple ways to begin? Like, where can it begin? This is out of what I decided, but if you could
sure. So, one of the things I've already addressed, so I'm not going to reiterate, is, start early. A lot of people are scared to start early, and I'm glad you mentioned this, because one thing I want everybody to know straight out is denial is the molester's best friend. So denying it is not going to make it go away. In fact, your child is more at risk if you're not embracing this and working on it, right? So knowledge is the biggest deterrent for a perpetrator, because they don't want to be caught, essentially. So knowing that a child can report, they have a healthy communication, they have a healthy bond, is something that is of safety on Instagram. We've been posting a lot of information about things we do. Overall, we have this thing called Walk the Talk Thursdays, is when we talk about concrete steps you can take, things you can actionable, things you can do. And so I'll just pick up a few things that I've shared from that. One of the things that is very important, which is why I'm doing this, is also that build supportive environments. Build an environment around your child where they can come up to you and talk to you. They don't feel judged. They don't feel like this is a avoiding questions, awkward questions that your child may ask. It can be as simple as, Mama, how are babies born? Or, what is this? Why is a girl's private part different than a boy? These simple things that seem harmless can actually, if they are tackled well, can help you build a fundamental foundation for some great conversations. And then your child will know that I can come up to you and I can talk to you and you're available and approachable. And I can't stress on enough. Also, we all know, we've all grown up, we've all been curious, we've all had a crush on somebody or the other. And so do we think that our children are any different? Do we think that they've come from another planet? They're going to go through the same process. They're going to be curious. They're going to explore. And how do we deal with these things? So I really want to say that build your communication. Are, the more easily you can discuss appropriate it's in the lockdown, in these COVID times, and the whole family is in the house. There are so many things, like my daughters and I, we read books, and sometimes even if they're just fairy tales or whatever, there are enough opportunities around us to use those as examples and say, hey, this is what this person has done. How would you have done it differently? Do you on Circles of Safety, we show a Kahani 2 video and we say, a mother, how has she dealt with it? She's given a scenario, etc. So these are ways that you can engage.
Absolutely. And even that was really good, because I may have seen that movie but may have missed of how beautiful that simple moment was, where Vidya Balan is trying to teach her, or in fact trying to ask her daughter if something happened, because I think
so we posted that.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
So there's a
Okay.
question I can see.
Yeah. So when the child asks these fundamental questions, how is it that we communicate it in simple, understanding words? So I think we'll be coming to this question in some time. We'll just
Okay.
Sorry. All right. So then, what are the distinctive signs for parents or elders to understand about abuse? All right. First, the identification that you mentioned a lot already. And then second is, as an educator, what insights would you like to share? Because parents, teachers become primary providers. So I think that'll answer here for her also, that how do you communicate? It's one of the ways. So can you give us certain examples exactly, like how do you communicate? Instead of this, what do you say?
Okay, so sorry, I'll take your first question. You said is identifying early. I think I've lost track of that.
No
Okay,
problem.
so let me start with early warning signs. I think that's a great question because that's the first step when you know that something may have gone wrong. So there are a couple of signs, but please be careful when I tell you some of these signs. I don't want you to think, oh, my child is being clingy, so he's been abused. No, it can just be that in these COVID times and all of that, it's created a lot of anxiety. Their entire routine is completely messed up now, and so therefore they may be doing certain things, and this can be even in regular life. There may be other reasons why they may be showing some of the signs. Sexual abuse may one of the possibilities, not the only possibility. Okay, I just want to flag that up before I go ahead with the signs. Yeah, because I've had people in my workshops get so anxious.
Yeah.
So one of the first one of the first signs is showing advanced sexual knowledge. So maybe they know about certain tastes, certain sounds, certain actions, and if they can describe that, and that at this age this is not appropriate, then hey, where did you learn about this? Has somebody been telling them some sexually explicit jokes, and because of that they know certain things, and then you can try and understand deeper. The other thing is sometimes they may act out sexually. So I, in a recent video, I did share that, not, sort of saying that I'm a survivor, and therefore I remember that sometimes I used to act out certain things with my dolls or my toys, and so these were on those signs. Sometimes a child, your child best. So if you think they're overly withdrawn, they're not meeting the same friends, they don't want to do certain things that they would usually love to do, they're being clingy, maybe they're not doing things independently as they would earlier, or sometimes they don't want to meet a certain person or show these signs of being uncomfortable around somebody. It's something that is worth looking into. And at the same time, they may be excessively clingy to some other adult in your family, maybe, or a neighbor or somebody, because they are getting special gifts, special attention. Basically, that person is filling a certain need that is not being met at home, right? And so that is something that also one can look into. Apart from that, sometimes they may act out very aggressively. Okay, so maybe sometimes even harming animals, hurting other people, etc. So it's that frustration, not being able to deal with the situation, feeling out of control, that may come out as aggression. Self-destructive behavior is also a big sign of something that is surely distressing the child, that can be looked into. There can be physical signs like discharge or bleeding, or some scars or bruises in the genital area, and these things obviously must be looked into. Go to a pediatrician and look into it. Sometimes older children show regressive behaviors like thumb sucking and bedwetting and soiling, and so even sleep, there's disturbance in their sleep patterns. So these are definitely some things, if not abuse, checked.
Absolutely.
What was your second question?
Yes. So second question was basically trying to, wanting to understand more about, as an educator, what were your insights, but you've given them all. So these were the things, but for parents, because like we've again seen the statistics during this pandemic, the abuse has gone really up, right? So then understanding as parents at home how they can understand if there are joint families, what are, because I think the most important thing that everybody needs to know is so many times I think mostly the abuser is around you. I mean, somebody you know, somebody from your family, somebody very close to you, somebody who can have an easy access to the child, like you said, you know. So that's why I just wanted some pointers, and you've given them a lot of them. So, and again, to mention, so many pointers belong to any emotional distress that the child is going through. It could be abuse or any other distress that you said. So, being aware and vigilant as a parent, I think, is one of the biggest role as a parent need to be, because I think children don't understand. As we are making them aware more and more, Anuja, like you doing so many education programs where you're making them aware about safe, unsafe touch. I think it's still the onus on us being elders or on parents to recognize these signs more easily than they coming and telling directly, right? I think that's
thank you so much for saying that, because I was going to say that keep preparing your child, but the onus is on the parent. I don't want to say parent, but on the adult, on the safe adult, because again, I don't want to assume that all parents are safe for children. That is a whole other topic that we can deal with later. Them the knowledge, but at the end, the parent or the adult has to be vigilant, and they have to look out for the signs, and they have to do the needful, essentially.
They can understand what we are giving out, and I think that's the good thing. There was one question, I think that we've covered that, right? So that's Rupali. Rupali, would you want to say if you want anything more on that? So please just tell us, we'll elaborate more. But I think Anuja's answered that question.
Is this the question where they said, how do we go about the fundamental, like what are the simple ways that we can answer the fundamental questions? So just from the top of my head, I can give you a more detailed answer later, Rupali. But from the top of my head, some of the basic things you can do is, please don't perpetuate more myths, okay? So if use correct names of body parts, for instance. Don't pass on your anxiety. These are very general statements that I'm saying. There are times that my child has also caught me off guard. She's asked me stuff like, Mama, is it okay if I marry another girl? Things like that. And I understand that at that point I'm driving or I'm walking my dog or something, and I say, hey, that's an interesting question. And do you think we can get back to this once, after dinner when it's at bedtime or something? So I've also bought time for myself to think it through, to process, to structure how I want to go about it. So just since someone here has mentioned, give me an example of how to speak about it. Let me just take this question that she has asked me about girls, right? I told her that, baby, there are some people who choose to spend their life with, suppose because she's my daughter, I'll say with girls. And there are many people who choose to spend time, with the boys. So it's something that as you grow up, you will eventually know what you would like to do. So it's very simple. I am not propagating any myths, but at the same time, people assume that by telling them as is, you are encouraging them and pushing them in a certain way. But you are not, because I think it is when you don't talk about it that you make them more curious. And you put them, and then they go to the internet, they go to their peers, and they learn all this unreliable information that may not even be age appropriate, that may not even be accurate. I know when we were growing up, because we that too from our friends, etc. So it's important to be accurate, be age appropriate. So I believe that any topic can be dumbed down to the level of that child. If you talk about reproduction, how a baby is born, if I have to tell a 6-year-old, I can do that, and I can tell a 10-year-old in little more detail, right? So these are ways that these are things you need to be aware of when you're answering a question. There are some I intend to keep doing that, but before I give any resources, I like to thoroughly go through it and check my comfort level before I share them. So please look out for all of this on my page, circles_of_safety on Instagram for all these updates.
See how we can take that up.
Sure.
Okay. So why do children find it difficult to disclose about abuse? Why do in all they find it difficult to talk about it?
This is such a common, an absolute common one, which it boggles a lot of people's minds that why don't people talk about it? To talk about my abuse, okay? It's not simple. It's not as straightforward as people think it is. So I think children experience this pressure cooker effect, which again I have spoken about on my page, where they wish to tell, but there is also such a deep sense of shame, guilt that they are not able to talk about. They also feel like they need to hide it because it's a taboo, a stigma, something that they've done wrong, something that they weren't supposed to be engaged in, etc. So there is this duality there, which doesn't help. I recently posted different reasons and the barriers to disclosure. So there is the individual factors. So like I said, the shame, fear, etc., that don't let an individual talk about it. Maybe they experience pleasure through this process, and so it has given them such a deep sense of this is not how it's supposed to be, because we keep calling it bad touch and good touch. Well, that is again very wrong terminology for everyone out there who uses that. Who says that bad touch, as what you think is bad, should feel bad? In many cases, it doesn't feel bad. So when you keep saying that's bad touch, the child feels more and more guilty about it. So I would say, so before I digress completely, to come back, some of the other reasons why, so these were the individual factors, and then there are these intrapersonal factors. So who was the abuser? Was it somebody they knew? Like in 90% of the cases, like you said, it's somebody they know, a neighbor, an acquaintance, an uncle or cousin or whatever, right? So if that relationship is there, then they may worry that they will cause chaos in the family, they'll cause problems, and then they don't talk about it because they don't want to be the root cause for trouble in the family, right? Also, sometimes when they come from very conservative families where parents have been very hush-hush, where sex and sexuality matters have been, like a big no-no, then it creates a big problem for them to talk about it. And essentially the context that we provide for the children, when you look at ads, when you look at movies, all of that, we've already shared so many of the patriarchal attitudes. We've already done so much victim shaming, victim blaming, and so children around us, and they hear and they take in everything, and so all these give them signals that they can't talk about this.
Right. And I think out of all of this is one of the things which, again, how much ever I've read, such that it's confusing the child, and they just want to keep going as it is. Like somebody said here, like sometimes not knowing whom to talk, because we talk about safe environment and safe home, but then, like you said, it's altogether a different topic to talk about if there are really all the homes that's safe for children. Right?
So you've brought out some really interesting points which I just have to comment on. Okay, I'm sorry, but So one of the things you mentioned, the developmental barrier, as I call it, is I didn't have the vocabulary to talk about what was happening to me because nobody had used the right words or told me safe, unsafe scenarios, etc. What do I say? I didn't even know it was wrong to begin with. So
Absolutely.
there's a developmental barrier about not having the right terminology. There is also threats that a child may receive. Suppose one do the same to this person also.
Yeah.
Also, this is something that goes against what most people believe. Sometimes a child doesn't necessarily hate the abuser because it may be somebody they talk about. They may not necessarily like the abuse, but if they talk about this, so it's very complex. And when adults and parents say, why
Absolutely. And I think that's the highlight. It is the neglect they get and the attention they get from the abuser could be one of the links that, just makes them not understand what to do with this. And believe me, as many as clients that I've seen, this has been one of the reasons why they couldn't really, because the neglect around, it's like, okay, I deserve it because I get it.
Yeah.
The other things are getting fulfilled there. So, yeah. All right.
It's like a bit of a give and take. You fulfill my need for care and attention, and I fulfill this need.
Yes.
That's how it's seen.
And that's how they say. These are the exact words like a lot of my clients in adulthood now talk about it. Right? As adults, when they have come out as survivors and talk about it, this is the exact thing they say, that it was more like a give and take that I felt. Or I felt that I deserved it because anyways my parents didn't love me. Nobody really loved me, and that was the only one person who did.
Yeah.
Right? All right. Okay. Then going ahead to talk about a little of understanding why do people do this? I mean, why do they commit such kind of sexual abuse? And if you can give certain behaviors that these abusers would, if we can recognize them, if that's easy. I know it's not, but then if we can.
Okay, so the two things you want to know are why do they do this, and is there a certain profile for abusers, right? Is that what you're... Okay, fine. So I wish there was a simple, straightforward answer to why do they do this. I think there is no one conclusive finding that says this is why it happens, because please understand this. There is no one set profile also for abusers to answer both those. So think about the people who are abusers, okay? They are right from teenagers to, like older children to, pensioners to neighbors. So the diversity is quite large. So there is no one particular mold that you can fit them in. However, there are certain things that research has shown that there are some people, especially if it's a family or acquaintance, that they've engaged in or they've approached a child because it's a situational factor. Maybe they were stressed at the point and maybe going through a divorce or maybe loss of a job or something, and that is how they ended up reaching out to a child. Sometimes they lack power and control in their own adult relationships. They are not and in their own environment, and so then they sometimes try and reach out to children and sort of feel more powerful. Set of abusers, there's a subset of abusers, and I'm stressing on the subset because I don't want everyone to freak out here, is that they have also been victimized in childhood. So I'm not saying that everybody who is victim of child sexual abuse turns out to be an abuser. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that when you look at profiles of people and when you've studied, when there's research been done on abusers, they have seen that there is a subset who have been victimized themselves. Okay, so these are some of the things that are known. I'm not saying that any of this is an excuse to abuse, but this is what research has shown. They've also shown that 70% of the abusers have abused between 1 and 9 victims. Okay, and there are 20% of abusers from the set that they studied that have victims between 10 to 40 victims. So it is very important to get help. Now imagine, as an abuser, it's not easy to get help because also there's obviously a lot of shaming, there's a lot of judgment, and the rehabilitative process, we have still not gotten there in India. Okay, so in the POCSO law recently, in 2019, there was a death penalty that has been introduced for children who have been victimized who are below 12 years and girls who have been raped who are below 12. Then there's a death penalty. Now imagine if the abuser was somebody who's a family member. Is that person going to report the abuse? No. And so they slip, and then more and more children are abused.
Yeah. Okay, so I think then talking about a lot of myths, because there's so many myths around these, right from talking about it, we'll do this, we'll do that. So I think I just want, because you again have this another myth buster Monday, which is wonderful, where you do all of this. So I want you to just pick up some very common myth and tell people here that,
Okay, so there are quite a few, but one thing that I've mentioned, but I've not really spoken about, so I want to stress on that, is that we believe that we can see what a good person looks like, but I just want to put it out there that we can't. We can't easily, and this comes back to your previous question also, that is there a profile? Abusers are charming, they're friendly, they're funny, they're charismatic, they're everything that we think they are not, right? So please understand this, that you need to just be vigilant, you need to be aware, and knowledge is power, especially in this case. When we talk about abusers, I want to specifically also bring up that when we talk about adolescents and children abusing other younger children, this generally happens. Suppose a child has been abused at a very young age, it's very likely that it's by a family member or an older child. So this is another myth that I want to explain. It doesn't mean that this child able children, because you have to understand this goes both ways. The victim also needs a very supportive environment, and if a child has shown inappropriate sexual behavior towards another child, I see many schools labeling, singling out, isolating. Please understand this, that they also need the support, because maybe they have been victimized themselves and they don't know about it. Maybe maybe they have known, maybe they're just curious, maybe they're exploring, and it has gone beyond a point and they don't know that this can't be done. So we must reframe, we must set boundaries, we must discuss, we must talk about. Again, we all want to believe that our child needs to be protected, but there are people out there who are doing this. So we must be realistic and realize that we must also tell our child to not offend in any way, that our child should also not cross boundaries. We all want to think this, making a special request that I need you to also talk about, we also need to talk about, just as it's not okay for somebody to hit you or hurt you in any way, it's not okay for you to make somebody uncomfortable. Suppose you're wrestling, tickling, and the other person is not comfortable, then you need to respect other people's boundaries. It's very simple. You just need to state it so simply. And if you keep harping on consent, and if you show that with your own child, in your own behavior, I'm sure it's going to trickle down.
Absolutely, and such an important part, which I think I probably didn't even think of doing this in today's life or asking is, what do we do when we tell a child to also, not do this? I mean, one side you can be a victim, but the same child or our own children can be somebody who can be, setting in such an example where we do not want them to go. So educating in both the manner, right? It's not only educating them to be safe, but then educating them to not do behaviors which will not be safe or cause discomfort to somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm almost done, so we'll just take one question. I think we'll have around 8-9 minutes to go before Instagram, will give us. So this one question that I think is quite interesting. When already they have survived with it. So basically she's trying to ask that when they have gone through abuse and they've survived, why would they do it again? Why would they indulge into same and in fact don't think of giving the same problem to others? Like, why would they do the same thing to somebody?
I think I understand the question, that if metaphorical sort of example, it's like bullies have been bullied. Bullies have felt so helpless. They have felt so powerless and so out of control that this is sometimes, regaining that control. Okay. Also, sometimes if they've been victimized, specifically I'm talking about children, okay, and if they are also doing this to another child, okay, suppose it's an older cousin or a friend's brother or something, then they themselves have they don't know what they're doing is wrong. They are just exploring, and sometimes there is healthy behavior and there's unhealthy behavior, and they don't know that they've crossed on to the unhealthy behavior side, and which is why these boundaries need to be reset. So that is why I say don't label them, because they're not consciously, sometimes it's just very maybe they've seen this, maybe they've seen it in movies, maybe they've heard somebody talking about it and they're exploring. Sometimes it's curiosity, right?
Absolutely.
And here sometimes, let me just please flag this to your same question. Parents think that my child should not be hugging or kissing another child, right? And that's why they think it's wrong. But they forget that maybe developmentally it is appropriate behavior. That at that age, curiosity is normal. But they think it is wrong, and therefore my child can't do this, and therefore it is wrong, and it's not like that. We've all grown up, we've all been curious. So please also, as safe adults, as parents, keep in mind that you need to be aware of what is at each age, what is appropriate behavior. Whether it fits with your worldview or not is a different point. If it is appropriate, then don't label it. Help your child deal with it.
Absolutely. And I think labeling it is again pushing it. Yeah, it does. I mean, I think labeling again is pushing it away from talking, and then probably then going to that moment where you will one day or the other know that this has happened. So like you rightly said, it may not set into your values, but then developmentally it is, this curiosity leads them to do a lot of things which could be physical enough, but then if
battery, so
that's fine. We have, I think, 4-5 minutes to go more. Then, like you mentioned some time back about POCSO, I want people to know that there's this act called Protection of Children. Can you hear me? Yeah, Protection of Children Sexual Offence Act, which came out in 2012. So would you want to tell some things about it so that, we kind of give a little legal touch to people know that there is something for it? Yeah.
Sure. So I can do that. So just to tell you that this Act of Protection of Children from Sexual Offences is a very radical act. It's very comprehensive because, initially I mentioned about the contact and the non-contact offences that make up child sexual abuse. It recognizes both. It recognizes cyberbullying. It recognizes child pornography. All of that is covered, and that's a huge leap from when you think about the IC and all of that where they didn't consider anything but penetration as abuse. The other reason why I think it's a pretty great law, at least in spirit, is that it's gender neutral. So it recognizes that boys and girls go through this. It's not just one. The other thing that I think that is great about it is that it, at least in the law, it specifies that let's try and make sure all of that. They're trying to make sure that the child is not exposed again to the abuser. They say that you should have special courts to deal with this, so not the regular courts. They expect also to have special support persons who can help the family and the child, inform them about the process, how they need to go about it. So there's a lot of support given to the family and the child. One other thing that I think is pretty cool is they have changed the onus. So they've changed the onus from the victim to the abuser. I just hope that in society, in the world, we can start doing that, okay? Because we still stress on the victim. So in this law, what they do is it's more like guilty unless proven innocent. Okay?
Yeah.
So it's on the abuser. It's not on the victim to prove that this happened to them.
Yeah.
So that's also a huge leap in the law.
Yeah.
Child is not sensitive enough to sort of deal with all of this with the care that it needs to be dealt with and handled with, and so children often get re-victimized. That's one of big reasons for them to not report. But
Yes.
it is mandatory under POCSO to report. And just to sort of end on that, I want to tell you 2 or 3 ways that you can report an incident if you know about it, and especially urge schools and educators to get the trainings for your school to understand the steps, the policies you need to have in place to abide by the law. Okay, and at Circles of Safety we even give these workshops if you need that. So 1098 is the child line number that you can call to report abuse. Under this POCSO law, if you look at the NCPCR website, there is a way that you can go to the ePOCSO box and report this online, and then automatically they connect to the police and the medical system, etc., and it's triggered and things are taken care of. So these are ways that you can report.
Right. And that's exactly why I think, like you said, it's a radical act, and I think they have few wonderful things, thoughtful things that they have put in there. It just, I think even if things are changing legally, a lot of things changing around, but I think the most important part is who are we surrounding with, and will somebody go and report? So I think the onus is on abuser. At the same time, the onus as an adult is on you. In case you're not the parent, but you see, like teachers, right, in the school, because if they get to know about it. So I think when you get onto education, you're educating everybody, right, Anuja? And I think that's something that maybe sometime later we'll talk about. And but I think it begins from school, then home, and then a lot of other people, like people online right now, need to know about it. We have 1 minute to go, so before we really end,
Can I just want to say something to everybody who's out there.
Sure.
Thank you so much. If you're an adult, if you're a safe, like a parent, I hope that thank you for shedding your conversations with your children. If you are a survivor, I really hope that today I have been able to let you know that you're not alone, and that I hope that you are able to talk about it and begin your healing journey, because it's very important to.
That's okay. I just thought that we'll wrap it up properly, because we had a wonderful discussion, so I just didn't want to abruptly end. Yeah. Okay, so you were saying something. Do you want to continue saying that?
No, I was just basically saying that I'm just going to get to a better lit area. Yeah, that if you're an educator, I hope that I have motivated you, and our discussion today has motivated you to look for early warning signs, to look for the troubled children, and instead of just labeling them, to sort of go beyond and try and figure out what is causing that distress.
Yeah, yeah. Like I remember as a psychologist when I started to work, the only thing my coach told me is for everything just go into why if you can, instead of saying how. Sometimes how may
Yeah.
not have an answer, but the why may have. So thank you for such a wonderful session, Anuja. I'm really happy. I think it was one of my sessions where it was an intense topic, but it just became more to understand. And I was right there because it's a topic for me also, which is quite sensitive. I've been, for a long time avoiding to take cases with this, but then some or the other way, they come in, and I decided one day to, get head on and understand it more and work on it more. So, really, thank you for, getting onto small things. And I think the way you spoke, a lot of people understood. It was easy and to agree to get on live so quickly. It was like I spoke to you and it was done. So thank you for that. And I'm waiting. Yes. And I'm just going to wait for, for us to educate more people, more professionals on this. And I'll get back to you with that plan. Definitely. All right.
Sure.